I caught my doctor's son stealing millions from the elderly. Then he threatened to destroy me. If you say another word, I will destroy everything you've ever loved. The whispered threat from my son's lips barely reached my ears as the bailiff called the courtroom to order. I straightened my spine, my weathered hands steady now despite the trembling that had plagued me all morning. 3 rows behind me, I could sense the journalists leaning forward, pens poised. This was the case captivating the nation. The respected black doctor who had systematically stolen everything from his elderly mother. I felt rather than saw Marcus's lawyer place a restraining hand on his client's arm. Too late. The damage was done. In 16 whispered words, my son had just sealed his fate. All rise, the bailiff commanded, and I stood with the fluid dignity that had carried me through 87 evictions in my building management career. Through my husband's funeral when Marcus was 12, through chemo treatments, through the day I found myself homeless at 71. The judge entered, silver-haired and stern-faced. Case number 2024 CR 7261, State v. Washington. Prosecution, call your first witness. The people call Eleanora Washington. As I moved to the witness stand, I passed within inches of my son. The gold watch on his wrist caught the light, my gift from his medical school graduation. Behind him sat his wife, Vanessa, alabaster-faced and expressionless in Chanel. After swearing to tell the truth, I settled into the chair, hands folded in my lap. Mrs. Washington, the prosecutor began, can you identify the person who orchestrated the fraudulent transfer of your life savings and property? A camera clicked. The courtroom held its breath. That would be my son Marcus Washington. My voice rang clear, each word precisely enunciated. The same child I raised alone after his father died. The same boy I put through medical school working 3 jobs simultaneously. The same man who promised the papers I was signing would protect my home, not steal it from beneath me. Marcus finally met my eyes, his face a mask I could no longer read. The son I'd known was gone, replaced by someone calculating what remained to salvage. And Mrs. Washington, the prosecutor continued, why do you believe? Objection. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained, the judge ruled. But I had made my decision. After 72 years of burying truths to protect others, today I would unearth everything. Even the secrets that would destroy us both. I leaned toward the microphone. Your Honor, there's something the court needs to know. Before we jump in, comment where you're tuning in from. And if this story has touched you, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 8 months earlier, the smell of smoke jolted Eleanora awake. Not real smoke, but the phantom scent that sometimes haunted her dreams. A sensory echo from the stories her grandparents had told of the 1921 Greenwood Massacre. She steadied herself at the kitchen window, gazing across the historic district of Tulsa where Black Wall Street had once thrived, where her family had defiantly rebuilt, and where their home still stood as a monument to resilience. She was arranging fresh-cut zinnias when the crunch of tires on gravel caught her attention. Marcus's sleek BMW pulled in, 30 minutes early for their monthly dinner, unusual for a son whose medical career increasingly consumed his time. Through the window, she watched him check his reflection in the car mirror and straighten his tie before retrieving his briefcase from the passenger seat. Something's different today, she murmured to herself. Mom! Marcus's voice boomed as he entered without knocking. His embrace was firm, cologne expensive enough to mask something beneath it. Anxiety? You look wonderful. And you look like you haven't slept, she replied, noting the tightness around his mouth. Is everything all right at the practice? Better than all right, he said, placing his briefcase prominently on the antique coffee table her grandfather had salvaged after the massacre. His fingers drummed its surface. Where's Vanessa? Here. His wife appeared in the doorway, cutting a sharp figure in a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than Eleanora's monthly pension. She air-kissed Eleanora's cheek, her eyes already scanning the room as if appraising it. The azaleas are lovely this year. Thank you. Dinner's almost. Actually, Mom, Marcus interrupted, flipping open his briefcase with a sharp click. We need to talk first. There's some paperwork we need to go through. Over the next hour, Marcus laid out what he called a financial protection plan for Eleonora. With her arthritis worsening and memory occasionally slipping, he explained, they needed to ensure her assets were secure. He described a trust that would shield her home from potential healthcare costs, while allowing her to live there indefinitely. I don't know, Marcus, Eleonora said hesitantly. Shouldn't I have my own lawyer look at this? Mom, I am a doctor. I deal with elderly patients and their families all the time. This is standard practice. He smiled reassuringly. Besides, getting another lawyer involved would cost thousands. I've already paid for this to be drawn up. Vanessa chimed in. Eleonora, Marcus and I have discussed this at length. It's really the most sensible approach. We're just looking out for you. Something in Vanessa's tone made Eleonora uneasy, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was her son, after all. Her Marcus, who'd held her hand at his father's funeral when he was just 12, promising to always take care of her. Eleonora signed the documents. 3 weeks later, she received an eviction notice. According to the papers, she had 30 days to vacate the property that now legally belonged to Marcus and Vanessa Washington. The trust she'd signed had indeed transferred ownership, not to protect her, but to remove her from the equation entirely. When she called Marcus in a panic, his secretary informed her that Dr. Washington was unavailable. Her calls went unreturned for days. When he finally answered, his voice was clinical, detached. Mom, this is really for the best. The neighborhood is changing, and that house is too much for you to manage. We found a nice assisted living facility. Vanessa will help you pack. But Marcus, this is my home, our family home. It's an asset, Mom. An appreciating asset in an area undergoing revitalization. The equity was just sitting there doing nothing. Doing nothing? Eleonora's voice shook. It was securing my future, my independence. Look, the decision's been made. I'll come by this weekend to help sort through what you want to keep. The rest we'll donate. The line went dead, and with it, Eleonora's world collapsed. She sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd taught Marcus to bake his father's favorite sweet potato pie, where she'd helped him with homework, celebrated his accomplishments, and nurtured his dreams, and felt utterly alone. The humiliation deepened when she learned from neighbors that Marcus and Vanessa had already been showing the house to real estate developers interested in the increasingly valuable property. Her son hadn't just betrayed her. He'd planned it meticulously, calculating the market value of her dignity and finding it wanting. The Harmony Gardens Senior Living Facility sat on the outskirts of Tulsa, a beige complex of identical units with narrow windows and thinner walls. Eleonora's new apartment was barely large enough for her bed, a small sofa, and a few cherished possessions. The family photos, heirlooms, and most of her furniture had mysteriously disappeared during the move, which Vanessa had overseen while Eleonora was at a doctor's appointment. 2 months into her involuntary residence, Eleonora sat with her new friend Lottie in the communal garden. Unlike most residents who were white, Lottie was also African American, a retired civil rights attorney who'd moved to Harmony Gardens to be closer to her daughter. You're too quiet today, Lottie observed, her keen eyes missing nothing. Is it Marcus again? Eleonora nodded. He was supposed to visit yesterday. Called to cancel at the last minute. 3rd time this month. And you're still making excuses for him in your head, aren't you? When Eleonora didn't respond, Lottie continued. You know, when I met you, I thought you were just another broken heart, another elder discarded by family who couldn't be bothered. But there's something different about you, Eleonora. Something steel-spined that hasn't quite accepted defeat. I'm just an old woman with nowhere else to go. No, Lottie said firmly. You're a Greenwood survivor's granddaughter. Your people didn't bow then, and you're not bowing now. I see it when you help Mrs. Abernathy with her medication schedule, because the staff keeps mixing it up. I see it when you organize the residents to demand better food. I see it when you're reading those complex financial books you hide under your bed. Eleonora looked up sharply. How did you? I'm nosy and observant. Sue me. Lottie grinned. The point is, most people in your situation would be broken. You're planning something. For the first time in months, Eleonora felt a smile form. My grandmother used to say that justice has patience. She waited nearly 50 years to see the Greenwood massacre even acknowledged. She taught me that sometimes you have to gather your strength quietly. And what strength are you gathering exactly? Eleonora hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook. I've been documenting everything. Dates, times, conversations. And I've been learning. Did you know that elder financial abuse is one of the most underreported crimes in America? Or that what Marcus did has a name, undue influence? Lottie's eyes widened as Eleonora continued. Before I was forced out of my home, I managed to copy some documents. Marcus didn't just take my house. He accessed my bank accounts, my retirement savings. And I don't think I'm the only one. She lowered her voice. His medical practice specializes in geriatric care. He has access to vulnerable elderly patients all day, every day. Eleonora, Lottie whispered. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm gathering evidence. And I could use a former civil rights attorney's expertise. Lottie's expression transformed from concern to determination. Well then, Mrs. Washington, I believe we have work to do. What Marcus had forgotten, or perhaps never fully appreciated, was that his mother had been the administrative backbone of 3 businesses simultaneously while raising him alone. Eleonora Washington had managed payrolls, tracked inventory, and balanced books with meticulous precision for decades. The skills that had put food on their table and her son through college were now being redirected toward a different purpose: justice. 3 more months passed as Eleonora and Lottie built their case. Using the facility's shared computer during off hours, they researched similar cases of elder financial abuse. Through careful conversations with other residents, they discovered that 2 others had children who were patients of Dr. Marcus Washington, and both had experienced unexplained financial losses after signing documents he had helped them understand. But their investigation took an unexpected turn when Eleonora received a visitor she hadn't seen in years: Darius Johnson, an orderly who'd once worked at Marcus's practice. Mrs. Washington, he said nervously, glancing around the common room. I don't know if you remember me. Of course I do, she replied. You used to bring me coffee when I visited Marcus at work. You have 2 daughters, twins. Darius looked surprised, then smiled briefly. Good memory. Look, I heard about what happened to you. And there's something you should know. Something I've been struggling with for a long time. Over the next hour, Darius revealed why he'd left the practice 2 years ago. He'd discovered irregularities in the medication logs. Prescription drugs being ordered in excess, then disappearing. When he'd brought his concerns to Marcus, he'd been fired immediately and threatened with fabricated accusations of theft if he spoke up. I kept quiet because I needed to protect my family, Darius explained. But last month, my grandmother became his patient, and now she's suddenly changing her will. I can't let this continue. Eleonora's hand trembled as she processed this information. Are you saying my son is involved in prescription drug fraud on top of financial elder abuse? I'm saying it's bigger than just him, Mrs. Washington. There's a network: doctors, lawyers, real estate developers. They target seniors with valuable assets and no close family oversight. Dr. Washington identifies potential victims, the lawyers process the paperwork, and the developers flip the properties. The prescription angle, that's just their side business. Lottie, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. Do you have any proof, Mr. Johnson? I made copies of some records before I left, and I've been keeping track of patients who seem to follow the pattern. I was too afraid to do anything with the information until I heard about you, Mrs. Washington. The 3 looked at each other, the weight of the situation settling heavily between them. What had begun as Eleonora's personal quest for justice had just expanded into something far more dangerous and far more important. They weren't just fighting for her home anymore. They were uncovering a criminal enterprise that had potentially harmed dozens of vulnerable seniors. That night, as Eleonora updated her notebook with the new information, her door burst open without warning. 2 uniformed security guards entered, followed by the facility director, whose usual smile had hardened into something altogether different. Mrs. Washington, he announced, we need to perform an immediate room search. There are allegations of stolen medication. Eleonora clutched her notebook to her chest. That's absurd. I don't take anything but my arthritis medication. Nevertheless, The director nodded to the guards who began tearing through her few possessions with practiced efficiency. One guard discovered the folder of financial documents, hidden between her mattress and box spring. "What do we have here?" He flipped through the pages, whistling low. "Looks like someone's been quite the investigator." The director snatched both the folder and the notebook Eleonora still clutched. When she resisted, his fingers dug painfully into her wrist until she released it. "You have no right," she began. "Actually, Mrs. Washington," he cut her off. "According to your residency agreement, which I'm certain you read thoroughly before signing, we have every right to search residents' rooms when there's suspected illegal activity." His smile returned, thin and reptilian. "And gathering financial information about other residents? That certainly qualifies as concerning behavior." As they turned to leave with her evidence, the director paused at the door. "By the way, your son called today. He's concerned about your mental state. Says you've been making wild accusations. We've agreed it might be best to restrict your movements for a while. For your own safety, of course." The door clicked shut behind them. Through the thin walls, Eleonora heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock from the outside. She sank onto her bed, heart pounding. They'd taken everything, her evidence, her freedom. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd confirmed her suspicions. The facility management was indeed connected to Marcus's operation. No one would move this quickly, this decisively, unless they were protecting something significant. Eleonora's fear crystallized into cold determination. They thought they'd cornered an old woman. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a Washington from Greenwood. The next morning, Eleonora was informed that her visitor privileges had been restricted due to disruptive behavior. She could no longer meet with Lottie or anyone else without staff supervision. Her access to the computer room was also revoked. They were isolating her, a classic tactic against whistleblowers. But they'd underestimated her resourcefulness. During her mandatory weekly check-in with the facility nurse, Eleonora complained of insomnia. "I just can't seem to sleep without my evening walks," she explained. "And now that I'm restricted to my room." The sympathetic nurse, who had always liked Eleonora, arranged for her to have escorted evening walks around the grounds, supervised, but outside her room. It wasn't freedom, but it was movement, and that was all Eleonora needed. On her third evening walk, when her escort stepped away briefly to take a phone call, Eleonora slipped a note into the hands of the facility's maintenance man, Ray, who had always been kind to her. The note contained Lottie's phone number and a simple message. "Call her. Tell her Operation Phoenix is now." Operation Phoenix was the contingency plan they'd developed for exactly this scenario. Within hours, the wheels were in motion. Lottie contacted Darius, who reached out to a former colleague at the Department of Health and Human Services, who specialized in investigating Medicare fraud. Simultaneously, Lottie filed emergency petitions with the court, alleging elder abuse, unlawful confinement, and violation of Eleonora's civil rights. But the masterpiece of their plan lay in what Eleonora had arranged months before, when she'd first suspected Marcus might betray her. She had recorded their conversations about the property transfer, using a small device her granddaughter had given her to record family stories. More importantly, she had secretly made copies of all her financial documents before signing anything, sending duplicates to her late husband's cousin in Atlanta for safekeeping. While Marcus thought he was isolating his mother to silence her, Eleonora's allies were building a case that would expose not just his betrayal, but an entire criminal operation. The turning point came 3 weeks later, when the local news ran a story about suspected elder abuse at several assisted living facilities in the Tulsa area. The reporter, a young woman whose grandmother had been a patient of Dr. Washington's, had received an anonymous package of documents outlining the network's operations. Within days, state investigators descended on Harmony Gardens. Eleonora, finally freed from her restricted status, met with them for hours, providing detailed testimony about her experience and connecting them with other victims. But her most strategic move was yet to come. Using Lottie's legal connections, Eleonora arranged a meeting with the federal prosecutor, who had taken interest in the case. There, she made an unexpected proposal. "I want immunity for my daughter-in-law Vanessa," she stated firmly. The prosecutor looked confused. Mrs. Washington, our preliminary investigation suggests she was deeply involved in this scheme. She was, Eleanor agreed. And she has all the evidence you need to bring down everyone else, including my son. What no one else knew was that Eleonora had been in secret communication with Vanessa for weeks. The carefully crafted note delivered through Ray had reached not just Lottie, but Vanessa as well. For Vanessa had her own secrets, including the fact that she'd been keeping detailed records of the operation, as insurance against the day Marcus might try to cut her out. Their unlikely alliance was born of different motivations, Vanessa's self-preservation and Eleanor's pursuit of justice, but it proved devastatingly effective. The day after Eleanor's meeting with the prosecutor, Vanessa Washington walked into the federal building with 3 external hard drives and a binder of documents that blew the case wide open. The preliminary hearing was set for a rainy Tuesday. Eleanora sat in the witness preparation room of the courthouse, her hands folded neatly in her lap to hide their trembling. The wool blazer she'd worn to every important occasion since Gerald's funeral felt heavier today, like armor for the battle ahead. "You don't have to do this," Lottie reminded her, adjusting Eleanor's collar. "The prosecutor has Vanessa's testimony, Darius's evidence, the financial records. I have to look him in the eye," Eleanor said quietly. "He needs to see that I'm not broken." When the bailiff came to escort her to the courtroom, Eleanor rose with dignity that belied her fear. The weight of every eye followed her as she walked the center aisle. Television cameras tracked her movement. The case had become a media sensation, a spotlight on the epidemic of elder abuse. Marcus sat at the defense table, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled. The expensive watch she'd given him still circled his wrist, a final insult. When their eyes met, she braced for hatred or defiance. Instead, she saw fear. Raw and uncomplicated fear. After being sworn in, Eleanora faced the packed gallery. Among the spectators were a dozen seniors from Harmony Gardens and other facilities, victims and witnesses who had come to see justice in action. "Mrs. Washington," the prosecutor began, "can you identify the person who orchestrated the fraudulent transfer of your life savings and property?" Her testimony cut through the courtroom like a surgeon's blade, precise, unflinching, and devastating. She recounted how Marcus had exploited her trust, manipulated her into signing documents, then discarded her like something disposable. Throughout, Marcus stared at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. Then came the moment no one expected. "Mrs. Washington," the prosecutor said, "our investigation uncovered something else, didn't it?" Eleanora took a deep breath. "Yes. While reviewing the financial records Vanessa provided, I discovered Marcus had been systematically stealing from me for years before taking my home. Small amounts siphoned regularly from my accounts. But that wasn't all." She looked directly at her son as she continued. "He had been stealing from his father's medical practice for years before Gerald's death. My husband suspected embezzlement, but never imagined it was our son." Her voice remained steady. "The practice bankruptcy after Gerald died wasn't from mismanagement as Marcus claimed. He had bled it dry." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. Marcus surged to his feet, face contorted with rage. "That's a lie," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. His attorney grabbed his arm, but Marcus wrenched free. "You don't know what you're talking about. Dad was running that practice into the ground." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order. Defense counsel, control your client." But Marcus was beyond restraint, years of carefully manufactured composure crumbling before their eyes. He lunged toward the witness stand, stopped only by the bailiff's swift intervention. "You think you're so righteous," he spat at Eleanora, struggling against the bailiff's grip. "You have no idea what it was like living with your expectations, your constant pressure to be perfect." Dad understood that. He was helping me. The courtroom fell silent, the implication of his words hanging in the air. In his blind fury, Marcus had just implicated his dead father in his crimes, something no one had suggested. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney pleaded, "my client is clearly under extreme duress. We request an immediate recess." "Mr. Washington," the judge's voice cut like steel, "one more outburst and I'll have you held in contempt. Bailiff, secure the defendant. Court will recess for 30 minutes. As Marcus was led away, His eyes never left Eleonora's. In them, she saw something beyond anger. The naked desperation of a drowning man realizing too late that he had been the architect of his own destruction. In the hallway, Eleonora leaned against the wall, her composure finally wavering. Lottie pressed a handkerchief into her hand. "You did it," Lottie whispered. "You broke his facade." Before Eleonora could respond, raised voices echoed from a nearby conference room. Marcus's unmistakable tenor carried clearly. "You promised this would never come out. You swore the records were destroyed." Another voice responded, lower but menacing. Eleonora recognized it immediately. Philip Barnes, the attorney who had facilitated the fraudulent property transfers for dozens of victims. When court resumed, everything had changed. Marcus slouched in his chair defeated. His attorney approached the bench and announced that his client wished to change his plea to guilty on all charges. "Is there a plea agreement?" the judge inquired. "There is, Your Honor," the prosecutor confirmed. "In exchange for Mr. Washington's complete cooperation against the remaining defendants, particularly Mr. Philip Barnes, the state will recommend sentencing at the lower end of the guidelines." As legal details filled the air, Eleonora sat perfectly still. This was victory, but it tasted of ashes. Her son would go to prison. The criminal network would be dismantled. Justice would be served. But there would be no restoration of what had been destroyed. That relationship had died long before this courtroom drama. Perhaps years ago when Marcus first decided his greed outweighed his gratitude. When the hearing concluded, officers approached to take Marcus into custody. As they led him past Eleonora, he paused, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. "It started with just a little," he said, voice barely audible. "Just borrowed money I planned to return. Then it became easy. Too easy." Eleonora met his gaze one final time. "The hardest right is always better than the easiest wrong. Your father told you that every day of his life." "I remember," Marcus whispered. Then the officers led him away. 6 months later, sunrise painted greenwood in amber and gold as Eleonora rocked gently on her front porch swing. From this vantage point, she could see the neighborhood transforming. New businesses opening alongside historic ones. Families moving in, life continuing its steady rhythm. The legal proceedings had concluded with an impact that rippled far beyond Tulsa. Marcus was serving an 8-year sentence, reduced from 20 for his cooperation in dismantling the entire operation. 12 indictments had come down, 8 guilty pleas secured so far. Philip Barnes awaited trial, facing decades for orchestrating the scheme. The victims, 37 seniors in total, had their properties restored and financial assets returned, though the emotional wounds remained. The media coverage had sparked a national conversation about elder abuse and financial exploitation. 3 states had already introduced Washington laws to strengthen protections. A familiar silver Cadillac pulled into her driveway. Lottie emerged with the help of her cane, followed by Darius assisting his grandmother from the back seat. "Look at you," Lottie called, "holding court on your throne." Eleonora smiled. "Just in time. The others are already inside." The living room of her restored home had been transformed. Where family photos once dominated, framed news articles and advocacy posters now lined the walls. A large table held pamphlets, information packets, and a sign-in sheet. A dozen seniors, all scheme victims, sat with family members and legal advocates, coffee mugs in hand. This was the 3rd meeting of the Greenwood Elder Justice Coalition, formed not just to support victims, but to prevent future abuse. What had begun as Eleonora's personal fight had evolved into something more powerful. A movement. "Everyone," Eleonora announced as the newcomers entered. "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Johnson, our newest member and a fellow survivor." As introductions circled the room, Eleonora stepped back to observe what had grown from shared trauma. These people, dismissed by Marcus and his co-conspirators as vulnerable, isolated targets, had formed an unbreakable community of strength and purpose. Their coalition was now consulting with financial institutions on fraud prevention, working with legislators on stronger protection laws, and conducting awareness workshops throughout the region. Next month, Eleonora would testify before a Senate Committee on Elder Justice. Later that evening, after the house had emptied, Eleonora sat alone in her kitchen. The moral complexities still troubled her at times. Turning against her son, partnering with Vanessa, exposing family secrets so publicly. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the back door, she found a young woman in her 20s, Marcus's daughter from a brief early relationship, Zora. Though Eleonora had always maintained contact with her granddaughter, Marcus had discouraged their relationship, creating distance between them. "Grandma," Zora said hesitantly, "is this a bad time?" Eleonora pulled her into a fierce embrace. "It's the perfect time." Over tea brewed from Eleonora's garden mint, Zora revealed the second twist in this winding tale. "There's something you should see," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. "Dad wrote to me from prison last month. He enclosed this for you, but asked me to read it first and decide whether you should have it." With unsteady hands, Eleonora opened the envelope. Inside lay a handwritten letter and a small silver key. The letter contained a confession, not just of crimes Marcus had been charged with, but something deeper and more personal. His resentment, he wrote, had begun decades earlier when Eleonora had initially opposed his relationship with Zora's mother, believing them too young for parenthood. Though Eleonora had later embraced her granddaughter, Marcus had nursed that perceived rejection like a wound. "I transformed that pain into justification," he wrote in a hand that seemed less confident than the signatures on medical prescriptions and legal documents. "I told myself you owed me, that I deserved what you had because you had denied me what I wanted. It was childish, selfish, and unforgivable." The key opened a safety deposit box containing Gerald Washington's journal, hidden by Marcus for years. In it, his father had documented his suspicions about Marcus's early embezzlement and his painful decision to confront his son. Gerald had scheduled the confrontation for the day after what proved to be his fatal heart attack. "Dad knew," Marcus admitted. "He was going to report me, his own son, rather than compromise his principles. I've spent years vilifying him in my mind to justify what I'd done. But he was right, and you were right, and I have been wrong in every way a son can be." The letter concluded not with a plea for forgiveness, which Marcus acknowledged he had no right to ask, but with information about a trust he had established before his arrest, funded with legitimate investments untouched by the criminal proceedings. The trust was dedicated to expanding the Greenwood Elder Justice Coalition, with Eleonora as director and Zora as successor trustee. "I cannot undo what I've destroyed," the final lines read. "But perhaps this can help ensure others don't suffer as you and my victims have. The coalition you've built represents everything I forgot about our family legacy: resilience, justice, community. It is the true Washington inheritance." Tears streamed down Eleonora's face. Zora reached across the table and took her grandmother's hands. "I've been studying geriatric social work," she said firmly. "I want to help with the coalition. This is where I belong." In that moment, sitting in the kitchen where generations of her family had gathered, where she had raised her son with such hope, where betrayal had been planned and now healing might begin, Eleonora understood the full circle of her journey. Justice had required patience, as her grandmother taught her. It had also demanded courage, strategic thinking, and the strength to stand alone. But true vindication wasn't in the restoration of property or the punishment of wrongdoers. It lived in Zora's determined eyes, the Washington legacy continuing through her. It thrived in the coalition that transformed victims into advocates. It existed in the knowledge that even from the darkest betrayal, something meaningful could emerge. As night settled over Greenwood, grandmother and granddaughter began planning the coalition's future, building on a foundation that extended beyond one family's story, a legacy of justice tempered with wisdom and strength forged in adversity. In the end, what Marcus had tried to steal could never be contained in property deeds or bank accounts. The true inheritance, courage, integrity, and resilience, had passed securely to the next generation, not through legal documents, but through the living example of a woman who refused to be victimized, who transformed betrayal into empowerment, and who never stopped believing in justice, however long it might take to arrive. If you made it this far, comment justice, so I know you support the story.